They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that college promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed. Disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Rogueways is deeply honored tonight to have a guest on the show who has single-handedly done more to help people break free from economic tyranny than almost anyone else out there. He has brought truth to our economic understanding of the world since the early days of the truth movements and has spoken all around the world, published 2 best-selling books on the subject, is a guest expert on many shows, both mainstream and alternative, and produces endlessly valuable content and reports available to anyone in hopes that we can free ourselves from what is likely the most nefarious and effective cage trapping humanity throughout all of human history, and that is the almighty economic cage of the centralized currency. Welcome, the man with the golden touch of liberty, John Sniesen. Am I saying your name right?
Pretty close. Sniesen.
Sniesen.
It's like it's just the Norwegian pronouncement though.
Oh, you're Norwegian. I'm Norwegian too, but
yeah.
I don't know anything about it, so that's why I can't read your name correctly. John Sniesen, thank you so much for coming on Rogue Ways, and how are you doing tonight?
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. Yeah, no, I'm doing great. It's been good weather now finally here in the province of Manitoba in Canada where we're at. So we're kind of like slowly. It's like a slow tease all the way till like the end of May here. Like with are we gonna get spring, or are we actually gonna just jump straight to summer? We never know. You'll
get a few grass like sprigs coming up and a few buds, and then like snowstorms will come back. Is that how it goes up there?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, before we fully get started, I do want to remind all the rogue warriors out there that the new show Middle Path is on Rokfin every Thursday at 7 p.m. Mountain, and we aim to strip away the trappings of the new age garbage from the truly spiritual and syncretic pathways that lead us toward deeper lives and experiences. So come to Rokfin, that's Rokfin, to catch that, and otherwise go to rogueways.org and see all of the other content that I do and tarot readings and all sorts of stuff like that, and so you can get that at rogueways.org. I can't wait to see everybody there, and at rogue.locals.com, which is where the community is, and that's where we all hang out and share things and post and whatnot. So go there as well if you want to hang out with some really, truly cool people. But John, back to you. The pointless question of the episode I always start with everybody, and for you, I wanted to ask you what your favorite things are about spring now that we're seeing the first hints of it in our types of areas of the world.
Well, my favorite things about spring, it must be, just seeing the beautiful green grass and like flowers coming up. That's my favorite. Like I grew up in Norway, so we had a way earlier spring. Like it usually came around my birthday in early March, but here you usually got to wait until like late April or early May. Sometimes like I tried to like plant my garden like at mid-May till like late May, but like if I planted too early, I got kicked a couple of times by a snowstorm. So it's like it's that fun time, but like it's funny here, like it's not so much spring almost, like it's hilarious. It almost goes like straight from winter to like pure summer.
I feel the same way. It's been like 70 something here lately, and I'm like, but come on, can we at least have a springtime where like 70's okay, but we start getting past that and I'm like too hot, and I could miss the summer. If I could cut one season out, it would be summer. I'm okay with just being kind of cooler. And
maybe that's the Norwegian in you. I'm like all the Norwegians that I know were like 20 Celsius people, so like that's pretty much around there.
It's gotta be that. Yeah, it has to be.
Yeah,
and the garden thing I can relate to too. I grew up in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest, and you can just like throw seeds at the ground any time of year and everything grows, and it's like beautiful. And here, you have to wait until like late May, and then you only get a couple months. If the sun doesn't scorch it to death, the soil isn't good, and it's just like it's so much harder to grow things here. I don't know about where you're at, but it's a challenge.
Well, you know what's funny here? It's like we actually have like extreme cold, so we could get like down to -30, -40 Celsius, and then it actually in summertime it could be like the total opposite in the on the plus side. So like we actually like there's pieces of summer where my garden goes from like just like slowly and steady to like exploding, and
Wow.
like if we get like 30-40 degrees Celsius for like a couple of weeks, it's like insane.
Wow.
So yeah, so we have like the two total opposites here. It's pretty cold for like 1 to 2 months, and then we got the extreme warm, yeah, through summer. So yeah, we got both sides because we got no protection. Like we're basically like middle of prairies. There's no mountains to protect us from like the cold from the north and the warm from the south. So we got the jet stream just like pummeling us right now, going forth and back like on top of us. So
Wow.
like as soon as it goes south of me, I get extreme cold and like crazy snow. And then as soon as it goes north of me, we get like up to 20, 30s, not 20, 25 Celsius sometimes right now.
Wow.
So it just like we had a day where we had like, it went from minus, no, sorry, it went from plus 15 down to minus 25. Yeah. In
Wow.
just one day. Yeah.
Wow. That's
So, yeah.
huge. Yeah, you get a lot of action up there. Um,
Yeah.
well, if you want to, John, take us back to, the early days and what got you into economics in the first place.
Sure.
How did you end up there?
Well, it's funny. It was actually my dad that kind of brought me into wanting to know more about things in general. Like he was a business owner. He always wanted to do things and make things better in his life. So he always like pushed to like try to find and know new things, and he actually like at an early time, like I even forgot when this was. Like I think it was like 2000 something. He had gotten forward a crazy website called Infowars at the time. Like this was before Alex Jones even got popular.
Yeah.
And I remember that, but that like kind of like just graced me. Like I was too much of a hardcore, not hardcore socialist. I would call myself like I believed in the greater good of the greater number of people for the longer period of time. But being a part of like the whole business thing with my dad, I got involved in a couple of multi-level marketing companies. And one of them, I traveled all across Europe to so many different, conferences that went on. But one, like I started to take a couple, like I went to one over in the US in 2008. And it was in Phoenix, Arizona. And I heard a guy called Robert Kiyosaki speak there. And his book is called Rich Dad Poor Dad. And he basically like showed how the system is rigged against, the employees and the small business owners in any country, like how we're taxed to death. Meanwhile, the ultra rich get away because they basically write the tax laws. So that kind of like he kind of like pushed me into reading some more of the books of like people that he had involved in his program. And one of them was a guy called Mike Maloney. So Mike Maloney, he's a monetary historian, and he also owns a gold and silver bullion dealership company. But he actually wrote a book called Investing in Gold and Silver, and that was the book that really like pushed me towards like wanting to know more about money and economics. So I was pretty excited about the book because he was talking about that, the central banks, or like especially in the US, were privately owned, all this different stuff. So it kind of like just baffled me. It's like, really, like what's going on here? So I just went on like a binge for years, like probably 3 to 4 years. Like it was 2012 when I first really like started to like post things and actually starting to get active and talk about things, because I didn't feel comfortable talking about economics, especially against the PhDs, that are supposed to be so smart and know everything about, our money and economics. So it took to 2012, I started something called The Economic Truth. And it didn't take longer after that. It was 2013. I got an email. Like I was all over the internet trying to find truth about things. And I signed up for this thing called Freedom Force International. And at one point I got an email saying that they were going to, for the first time ever, meet up. And we actually went to a place called Paso Robles in California. And there I actually bumped into the guy that started it, which probably people here might be familiar with. His name is G. Edward Griffin.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that whole organization, like together with another lady called Annalisa, they tried to like get it off the ground and kind of start to get people involved directly, because it's been kind of a dream of Ed to like have an organization that is actively, pursuing, trying to change, the United States, especially for the better. So I went there, and then they said like, well, we're gonna have to now we're gonna get a board together of people that are gonna be a part of this. So everybody had to stand up and say why they're there and why they were passionate about freedom. And so I did my little, I think it was like, it's basically like an elevator speech. You go to a business club, and so I did that, and then suddenly I got voted in with some pretty amazing people that I wasn't aware of all these people. I didn't even know who Ed Griffin was. Like most people know who he is before they meet him,
Yeah.
but I didn't know it until I actually met him, and then it finally dawned upon me like a couple of months in that, oh, this guy is a huge deal, like a really big deal. Like he's the father of exposing a lot of things that have been happening with manipulation of media and all. The government and how they've been abusing power and all this stuff. Yeah. So it was just amazing. But yeah, so I've been going on reading tons of books on monetary and economic history, because I find it very interesting on learning how people throughout history like interact and how so many similarities, like how we keep on like repeating and history has so many similarities. So where we're now and those things have happened like hundreds of times throughout history. So I went through that and read so many books. And at one point, there was a guy that said like, well, you know so much about this stuff. How about you write a book? So I was like, well, I'm not very good at writing. Like I suck at writing because like my grammar is terrible. So I had like I wrote my first book called The End of Freedom: How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us. And that book was kind of a basic on like how money works, and it went from the Greek and Roman empires all the way up to modern day history, kind of trying to like take the past and like try to show people how we repeat the same things over and over again. So that's kind of like teaching people, but in a very simple way. So where I'm like totally different from any like academic out there, I use almost zero academic language, teaching economics, which is like very different.
It's very refreshing, because a lot of people get lost in all that,
Yeah, exactly. So I did that book, and then somebody wanted me, because I'm Canadian, they wanted me like, well, why don't you I want to know what's going on in Canada. So I ended up writing another book on the Canadian economy called Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, ? And it was based upon an article written by, I think it was like basically like a pro banking group saying how great Canada was and how we were above everybody else. And there was nothing better than Canada. And Canada is this fantastic, country. And so I decided to maybe take a look at and see what was so fantastic, and turned out it wasn't that's great as they try to tell people. So yeah, so those are the books that I've written. And then of course I've been on World Alternative Media. I'm not sure if Josh Sigurdson from World Alternative Media. I did about 900 videos with him.
Wow.
And then of course all those got deleted by YouTube. They're all gone now.
Oh god.
Yeah, and then after that I joined up with Tim Pichot, which has been on the Union of the Unwanted as well, and both me and him were like geeks when it comes to economics. So we're doing our own little thing called Tim and John Show now, where we have on guests sometimes, or we just like talk about money and economics.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it's so important, I think, for people, because even one of the like tiny things you mentioned is like the Federal Reserve is a private organization, and like we don't even get taught that. I was in, I don't know, somewhere in college, I took an economics course, and I had that literally the Economics for Dummies book, and it said it in there, and I was like, hold up, what? Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's fascinating. And so there's so much that you know, that you expose and that you can share with people that gives them like the keys and the tools they need to in order to see the cage as it exists, and possibly the escape route from the cage too. But if you had to trace it back, since you also look at the history of it all, what do you feel like is the like the root of the ill in this economic trap, in this system? Just to jump to some really meaty.
Oh yeah. No, I think the root of it all is just people that want to control things. I think it comes down to a very simple point where you have the people that want to control people, and you have the people that just wants to be left alone and just go along with their life. The problem is usually the latter abuses the other throughout history every single time. The modern day like paper type of currency system that we're almost trying to like get away from now, that has been around actually very soon for 1,000 years. It was created by the first ever paper money, like physical printed paper money was printed by the Sung dynasty, and it started in 1024. What was interesting with that, they started with the backing of what they call coinage. So they had like copper that was supposed to back 30% of all the paper that they issued. But over time, like they just decided to print more and more, and still like just leave the 30% that was there. So now it's lesser and lesser backing. Well, doesn't that sound familiar to the United States? You know, going away and printing more and more currency, and then eventually going away from the gold standard. Well, the Chinese did that in I think it was like in the early 1100s. They went away from like having that coinage backing. They didn't have gold, but they have coinage backing. So they went away from that, and then suddenly, you know, their currency failed. But what was more interesting is that they actually had an economic boom, and they had a lending, and they had interest rates charged on everything. So they actually had a very similar system back then, and it was called the Chinese miracle. Like, not a lot of people talk about this because it's written, you know, in Chinese. And but I found a treasure trove book called The History of Fiat Paper Money by Randall T. Foster. He's like a PhD, but he was also a money collector. And this book is like, I think he might have passed away, the guy, unfortunately. But like, this book is like the most epic book I ever read. Like, it literally talks about every single almost paper currency and central bank that have existed. And I was like, really? Like, there's been like hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of these things, and they fail every single time. Like I don't know, like people think that they could reinvent the wheel, and it's so tempting because they want to be able to have the power to print currency so they could grow the world, like their empire, into this big thing with it. But over time, there's too much of it, and then, you know, it's becomes worthless slowly over time. So
it's based on
every single time,
nothing. It's based on nothing. I remember when I was a teenager and my mother or someone was explaining to me what credit was, you know, and I was like, well, doesn't that not make any sense to anyone? I mean, how does this, I was like, I'm a kid and I'm looking at this like, how do adults play this pretend imaginary game that we can all just create something out of nothing? Because eventually that has to catch up with you. We unfortunately live in a very material world, right? So if you don't have something actually backing this up, then what are you actually doing? You're playing with nothing. It has to fall apart someday. I don't even have the big words to explain why, but my tiny brain was like, that doesn't make any sense. It's going to fail. And it's true, right? It can't win.
Oh, yeah. No, totally you can't. And like throughout history, what happens is that you get a booming middle class. Like they didn't call middle class like hundreds of years ago. But what happens is that you get the class, like usually of rich and poor in communities that have little to no like currency or money in supply. So because you don't have credit available for anybody to, you know, like move a little bit up. So as soon as credit gets implemented into a monetary system, well, now the poor can actually like start moving upwards. But the thing is, like, as more and more people move upwards, everybody starts lending money. And at one point you end up with everybody being indebted almost. And then it's like, hey, we're all in debt and we can't pay it ever back again. So that's why you see like now, like they have to, you know, do all the stimulus. They have to basically just print oblivious amount of money. They have this modern monetary theory that they've been talked a lot about now, that yeah, we can just print as much money as we want to, which is funny if you look at a history. Like, I wish these guys would have picked up a history book, other than, you know, these PhDs only learn about the last 90 years or 100 years now of monetary history in their curricula. Like, that's a PhD education, and you would think that they would have some heavy understanding of monetary history, but most of them don't. When you go and listen to like Janet Yellen or to Jerome Powell or Ben Bernanke, like, these guys only like talk like further back. Like, Ben Bernanke was talking about the Great Depression, that was the big thing. But like, how about looking further back? Like, how about looking at the implementation of central banks in the first central bank in Sweden, or even before that, the Chinese empires, that they had like 4 empires repeating this whole monetary cycle like every 100 years in China. So they had like the Song dynasty, then they had the Qin and the Southern Song dynasty, then they had the Yuan dynasty, and then there was one after there that I am forgetting. But the Yuan dynasty was the Genghis Khan. And what was interesting with Genghis, he printed money. Like, you never really hear about it when you hear history, you know, talked about Genghis Khan and so on. But he was a genius. He created he printed currency, and then he, you know, that's how he expanded his empire. There's actually, I think Marco Polo was over there. I forgot which empire, which dynasty it was during. I think it was the Yuan dynasty, or no, maybe later after that, because he was around a little bit later. But he was actually baffled by how these Chinese were trading, you know, paper between each other. And he couldn't fathom it, because in Europe they had gold and silver as money. So he was just overwhelmed by it. But Genghis Khan, actually, he tried to expand his empire and then have everybody adopt this medium of exchange around the world. And he actually, the first resistance he really met was in the Middle East, where they burnt the paper money, the yuan. It was called something else. It wasn't the yuan. I forgot what it was called, the currency, but they burnt it in the streets because they wanted just metal. You know, that it was like, why are you guys giving us this worthless paper? There's no value to us. So it was pretty funny how that works. Like, you never hear about that side of, you know, the Genghis Khan story, for example, like how he built his vast empire.
Yeah, you hear a bit of the military strategy, and then I feel like he's just kind of like dismissed.
But how does he fund that?
Yeah.
How does he fund the military empire, right?
Wow.
Like, how did you get that? Like the Roman Empire, how did they fund their gigantic, military? No, they made, like, they started to debase their currency. And at one point, the Roman Empire, like, they were before paper currency, but they debased it by taking out, more and more of the precious metals out of the coins. So they applied a little bit of copper into it and so on over time. So it became less and less worth, the actual physical currency. I think it was 212 year 212 something. I have like a 1 denarius at home, like a silver coin. But then they created another 1 denarius after that, which was, it was a 2 denarius, but it was double the size of the 1 denarius, and it had only 50% silver in it. So it was way less worth, the actual currency. But over time, like when you end up in like year 400 something, you actually see them just printing copper coins now at this point. And when you go and look at any modern, any modern country today, we used to gold and silver currency, all of us, and then we just debased it by putting lesser and lesser metal into our coinage. And now we just basically almost have just paper money left because it's worthless. It's not actually worthless. It's so valuable now that they had to go away from using the penny in Canada and the 50 øre, which is the cent in Norway. They had to get rid of it because it was too costly. Like 1 penny cost 4 cents to make in Canada, so they couldn't make it anymore. So they just got rid of it. So those kind of things, like, that's how they funded, like the Romans funded their military over time. But then suddenly Mills was like, well, wait, like you guys are paying us in lesser and lesser valuable currency and giving us the same salary. So they stopped, like, it's like, no, we don't want to be a part of this anymore. And then, of course, the empire falls, and that's how a lot of empire falls. Also together with that credit creation in the more modern, like last 1,000-year kind of era. So it's just super interesting to watch like how these empire rises and falls. But usually, like in history, like recent 2,000-year history, or even back to the Greek Empire, it was that kind of like way of like lessening the value of the currency, but that's how they also were able to purchase more materials and so on to build up their empire. And that's what the United States have done big time. The United States is the biggest empire the world has ever seen, really, when you think about it. So, but it was all based upon, they tried to be like a stable currency, but then over time, as they built this empire, they vastly expanded their currency worldwide. So now that's how they got away from losing their value initially, is that they just shoved all the currency abroad. So you didn't get like if they got all that currency got stuck in the US, the US dollar might have dropped so much in value that suddenly people wouldn't want to accept it. Now, the number one way actually money like currency disappears from the face of the earth and becomes worthless, is actually like people like you and me and everybody else saying like, well, I can't use this money anymore. It's become so worthless that I can't pay for, like, me getting paid in this. I can't afford to survive and buy my own food anymore. And so, like, have you like looked at all the riots that we had before COVID? Like, a lot of them, when you go in detail and look at what people are saying in the streets, they're hungry. A lot of them, they like the Arab Spring. That was all. They couldn't, like, their currencies were worthless because they couldn't afford commodities like food and water. Which, when we can't afford that, you're gonna have a revolution on your hands. Like the French Revolution started that way. Most other revolutions start with that, because it's basically the currency is destroyed and things become so expensive that people just rise up, and that's what they're seeing right now, isn't it?
Yeah. And I almost wonder then if they plan it that way. They're like, we're going to make this more and more rather less and less valuable, and we're going to make it harder and harder for you to get food, so that you're going to like revolt and destroy your own nation in a way, and also we still aren't going to help you afterwards, and then you're just going to live in even more suffering. And like, I don't know how much of this is calculated and intentional, when I see that sort of stuff.
Well, if it was, it'd be genius, because they are the ones on top. They could borrow infinite amounts of money at near 0% interest now. They buy all the assets, these rich people, right? Like, look at like what didn't happen now in the biggest creation of currency ever, who became like ultra wealthy while everybody was starting to starve in the streets, especially in the United States. Holy smokes, like all the poor people that were, out, getting food from the food banks. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, you had Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, all these guys are becoming super wealthy. Like, their wealth gained tremendously amounts of size, and like it's just total distortions. Like, and first of all, like, money used to, like, so the price of money is interest usually. That I'm not against lending, with an interest. If you have a lot of money stored up and you want to like lend it to somebody that could use it in a way better way than you can, I'm for that. But the problem is, over time, is that everybody wants to do it, and that's how you destroy the currency, because now everybody wants to charge interest. But when you borrow money to someone, let's do a super easy example here so people can understand how the money is never, can never pay back. So I borrow you $100. It's the only currency in the world, but I want interest on that. Let's say 1%. So you're gonna have to pay me back like $1, right? Where you can get that $1 from when there's nothing existing?
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna have to print another dollar and then charge interest on that. So you can see like how there's like, no matter how much, like if you pay down all the debt in the world, there would still be interest that you would have to pay for it. So you would be bankrupt. But it's all these banksters that I call them. They are the ones like creating so much of this currency. Like you got the central bank, but the bankers today are the ones that are actually creating most of the currency. Because when as soon as it gets into circulation, it used to be that you would have to have like you'd only create $1,000 out of $100. So in lending, you could, if you have $100, you could then, lend out $1,000 on top of that $100 in new currency. But now it's actually, there's no reserve, so it's all up to the central, like to the banker to actually, be able to give you that loan, and they could just lend out as much as they want. It's just up to the banker's discretion to make sure that they're not going bankrupt, or like, because when people find out that there's something that is not quite right, and I think there's so many people that are starting to feel this now because they feel their pocketbooks, especially our parents, the baby boomers, they have seen this and felt it firsthand, like how things are, massively increased in prices. When they were younger in our age, they were actually able to just work one person and be able to, afford to keep a whole family with 3-4 kids. Today, good luck with that. Yeah. Like, I gotta have my wife in order to be able to survive, properly. And it's hard to be lonely by yourself and on one salary anymore. So people are struggling a lot because of that, but it's all because of this currency printing scheme that has been going on for a long time. But as said, the first ever printed paper currency took, it took just over 100 years for them to destroy it. So it's that time frame. Like, usually I say that it's about 2 or so generations that we forget what the other generation has had as problem. I think that the Germans are still feeling that yet, because they had a hyperinflation in the 30s, in the 20s. So they still have some people that can tell, the story. But as those people die off that actually like lived through that, it's, lesser and lesser and harder for them to tell that story. And then we forget, and then we commit the whole cycle over again by printing too much money, by everybody borrowing. Like today, like everybody and their old corporations are starting to act like banks and lending money now. Like good old General Electric. They used to be, creating real things of value, producing, what do you call it? Washers, dryers, microwave, all this stuff, right? They used to create things that actually was valuable, but what did they do? They went out and created a lending, GE Financial, it was called, and then General Electric went south, like their corporation, and Home Depot, like all these, like just go to any like big store today, all of them have like a credit card or something that you could get, right? Because that's, everybody's got to be a bank today to create money and more money. It's just insane. Like, and that's just the sign of like the end of things, I think. I just can't see how we have like more than maybe 10 years at the most. But they've been able to keep it alive for a bit, but that's because they've been going insane. I call it monetary insane, because they actually like dropped interest rate. There was a guy that posted all interests that have been charged throughout the last 700 years. And it was funny. It was like watching a chart going like this, just downwards and all the way down to today. And we were basically, at record lows. We never seen 0% interest rate, and even negative was never ever existed in history. So this is just a financial engineering tool that these elites are using. They can't quite succeed with that yet. So that's why they're talking about these digital currencies. And we could talk a little bit more about that, like how then it makes possible for these crazy people to then charge negative interest rate, because they actually planned it. They talked about this since 2016. And there was actually a book called The Curse of Cash by Kenneth Rogoff, talking about how we can get rid of cash. Well, so these elites,
Wasn't the cryptocurrency creation predates that though, right? Do you think that they created Satoshi Nakamoto or whatever and all of this in order to accomplish something, or do you think they saw it created and were like, we're gonna hop on that train?
That one is hard to tell, because there's no like hard-based facts that you can find anywhere. I've been wanting to find like, is the CIA or somebody In-Q-Tel that has been, in there, invested in this stuff. We never really know. We have because there's no like corporations or anything behind it. It was a whole bunch of individuals working together. So most likely it probably wasn't. But of course, they've taken huge advantage. They've been studying it, for ever since it got up. Well, probably since like 2012 to 2014, they started to pay a little bit of attention. And then by 2016, the book The Curse of Cash came out, where they actually are talking about how are we going to get rid of cash and go into negative interest rates to save the whole monetary system from collapsing. He didn't say that in the book. He's like Kenneth Rogoff is like the chief economist, used to be for the IMF. So he's like one of the top economists in the world, and he wants to get rid of cash. And so I started to after I read this book, is like, oh, what's going on here? Nobody was talking about cashless at the time. Well, then suddenly you see countries like India tried to ban certain, higher denominated notes and all this stuff. And it was straight out of his book. It was basically his policies that they used. So he's the scumbag, that is sitting in, of course, the IMF. We could talk so much about the IMF and the criminal racket over there.
Right.
But yeah, so basically, I think, they must know better. I hope so. These crazy monetary elitists that are, sitting on top of central banks in the world. Because if they don't know better, that'd be totally insane to me.
That's even scarier.
But then there would have to be some elitist puppeteers on top of them again, which definitely could be.
Could be.
And could be. And there's they're creating so many different organizations now. There was an organization created back in 2008 during the financial crisis called the G20. And it's the top 20 countries in the world. But also what was kind of passed on, and this was a guy called Mario Draghi that was running it at a time. It was very small. Nobody cared about it. It was called the Financial Stability Forum. But in 2008, they decided to let's engineer the world, and let's create let's re-engineer the world. And actually they wrote a book on it too. It's called The Redesign of the Global Financial Architecture, The Return of State Authority. And this is by a guy called Stephen P. McIntosh. He's a guy that nobody's ever heard of, but he's actually the head of organization. So I call this organization the Bilderberg of finance. It's called the G30 group. And so what that group was doing is they were trying to develop through the G20 organization. It used what was called the Financial Stability Forum at the time as a mechanism that they believed that they could have greater control of engineering, not only the United States, but Canada, every single G20 country in the world. So what has happened now? Well, now it's called the Financial Stability Board, FSB, which is funny. That's what the former KGB is called now in Russia, FSB. But so it's called the Financial Stability Board. It was actually taken over at the time in 2008 from Mario Draghi, which is now the prime minister. Former Goldman Sachs is now prime minister in Italy, pushing mandatory vaccinations on nurses and doctors. So this guy is a total scumbag, right? And he passed it on to Mark Carney. Well, what did Mark Carney do? He was the former head of Bank of Canada, so the central bank in Canada. He destroyed basically Canada by pushing down interest rates, selling all the gold that we had. And then he went to Bank of England, when at that time, he actually also became the head of the Financial Stability Board at the time. So he went to England, and look where England is now. He totally destroyed England. And he's a Goldman Sachs dude. These Goldman Sachs people is everywhere. They were in the US with Hank Paulson and all that, right? During 2008 crisis. But so he goes and he's at this Financial Stability Board. So what their plan is, they can sit there, about 20 people, top central bankers in the world from the top, central banks, sit there and then make legislation for the whole world. And it's not just like you heard about the Bank of International Settlements probably. So it's not only that takes only care of the banking industry, but they have international, what they call standard setting bodies for accounting. So there's one for accounting, one for securities. So all the stocks in the world and markets And then there's one for, sorry, I said accounting. Oh, and then insurance. So they have four of them. They're banking, insurance, accounting, and securities. So they have these four big international organizations that then, from the Financial Stability Forum, creating rules. They actually created the bail-in legislation, which you probably have heard of, like bail-ins and banks. In Cyprus, they did what's called a bail-in in 2013. So Cyprus failed because some banks have used derivatives to bet on the failure of Greece, but they got bailed out. So all these derivatives failed, and then the banks in Cyprus failed. So what happened was that people, you're supposed to have like a deposit insurance scheme in your country, right? So like the FDIC in the United States, the CDIC here in Canada, and so on. They had one as well. But what ended up happening, there was so much money lost in two of the biggest banks that the people that have under 100,000 euros, they actually had lost 10% of their currency. They called it a haircut. It's basically a tax, but they also call it recapitalization. So they basically got to give that money back. So when you put your money in the bank, it's not yours. You're lending it to the bank. And so what happens is that they go out and do a whole bunch of crazy things with your capital, and then they lose it, and then you're on the hook for most of it. God. Like just recent, in my book, actually, Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, I exposed that the CDIC, so which is the FDIC of Canada, they only had 0.39% of what they were supposed to protect, of pensions, all the deposits. Yeah, but no, it gets worse. So I did the numbers again this year because I'm kind of trying to like do a little bit of a revision because there's so much happened since I wrote my book in 2015. So in this, the new numbers is 0.0008. And you know what's funny? I'm on LinkedIn a lot, so I post a lot there. And so I posted on LinkedIn and said, like, well, if somebody want to verify if I'm totally wrong here, but I looked at their balance sheet. So basically, I looked at their financial statement, and financial statements doesn't lie. You can't lie in your financial statement. So I said, like, basically, you have 0.0008% of your money, like in your total fund with all the investments that they had. But you know how much the cash portion, like physical cash that they had, that was 0.000006%. And then I asked, like, so what's going on here? Like, and then what is up with, the CDIC having commercials constantly on mainstream radio and mainstream TV? So they actually came back to me. They didn't discount anything. They said, like, well, yeah, this is like how much money you have, but we could get X amount more from the government, which only made up to like 0.01% or something if they added 25 billion or whatever they could get from the government. But then they also said that, well, John, the reason why we have so much commercials is because there has been done a lot of research on this, that when you constantly put out a message that it's safe, people believe you. That's what they wrote back to me.
They didn't say it's true. They just said, we want to brainwash everyone, and it's working.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
It was very weird. Yeah, the actual Canada Deposit Insurance Corporation got back to me and said that.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, but I'm pretty sure it's very similar in the US and every other country that they have these schemes. So there's people having their money in the banks today. It's very risky, actually.
Yeah.
It's extremely, this is of course not financial advice, because or else they'll put me in prison. But it's my opinion from looking at their balance sheets. That's
Well, and this is why, when Bitcoin was, first in my world, which was I think around 2012 or so, people were, I was basically for it, right? I don't know a lot about anything, but I had a very intelligent partner, and he knew everything about it. And so I was like, okay, I kind of understand it a little bit. But people would say, well, it's just fake money. It doesn't have any value. And I was always like, well, neither does the money you have in your pocket right now. Like, realistically, right? Realistically, it has no value. It has value because the person you're going to give it to perceives value in it the same as you, and you've agreed on that, right? It's all in your head.
Yeah.
So if you do that with Bitcoin, it's exactly the same. You could do it with bottle caps. You could do it with anything you want. It just so happens right now you're doing it with little pieces of paper, but for some reason, as much as I can say that out loud and I think explain it pretty clearly, like, people don't accept it. They would just be like, no, that's not how it is. And, you know, and I'd bring up the gold standard thing. We don't even have anything backing this currency. We have nothing behind it. It has no value. It's literally just this piece of paper and what's in our head, and they don't care. They're just, nope, that's not true.
And guns. And
yeah.
guns.
Yes.
You know?
True. But how do you get people to understand that you know, that money is literally just this concept that we have, and that we could make anything into currency? And, you know, I think it'd be better if we had like an actual thing behind it, like gold, right? That was at least a step up from where we're at now.
Yeah.
But that it doesn't have this inherent value, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, it's money and currency is very interesting because it's just the perceptual value. And people even tried to say that gold has intrinsic value, but not even gold has intrinsic value, because people in other parts of the world never used it. For example, you know, there was Indian tribes trading shells and pearls and so on, right? So it has whatever it has your perception of value, and it's generally agreed upon that, you know, this has value and we can trade it in between each other. It works until it doesn't work, because somebody will come up with a scheme to then create more of it and all that stuff, right? It's like every single time throughout history. Gold has been probably the best one because it's very hard, like you basically can't replicate it. It does come out of the ground at 1.5% usually, like increase in supply every year, but it's way better than, you know, the paper currency. But Bitcoin is actually very interesting though, because it's a little bit different than any other currency that is out there, because you could actually not print more units of it. Currently you can, until you cannot in 2100, because there's going to be 21 million in supply, but currently there's 18.5 or something right now. I forgot the exact number that has been made of units of Bitcoin. But there will be 21 million, and that would be it. So that is the big difference between Bitcoin and gold. And also another fantastic feature that Bitcoin has that gold doesn't is that it's infinitely divisible. You could divide Bitcoin, so they could rewrite this algorithm that they have into, like, now they have 8 zeros behind the decimal, but they can make that like 16, 32, 64, 128 different like zeros after if they wanted to. So that's a massive future. But then it's digital. So, you know, you could potentially be able to, you know, shut it off if you did just shut off all the power. People say there's some ways around it, but it's not going to be very easy to use it. Like I love Bitcoin, but I'm also the ultimate critic of it, together with all other currencies, because I studied monetary history and I understand that, you know, it's a lot about human psyche and psychology and understanding like how we can misuse things. And of course, you got all these other currencies that are getting made as well, like that wants to compete with Bitcoin. Bitcoin used to, like, was supposed to be cash when it initially was created. It's funny to listen to the guys that are like the top echelon now saying that, it's digital gold, but you guys were saying that it was digital cash back in the day. So don't even lie to me. Like you guys, which is fine. Like, it turned into digital gold. I'm all okay with that. You know, you just store it and then you protect yourself from the deafening, you know, inflation that is, you know, happening under the radar that we don't really see too much. So, we do see a lot more now, because you get more and more people wondering why every year, you know, they're getting further and further back, because what is happening is there's always a lag in between, you know, the payment of your salary and the actual increase in supply of currency. So it's like, let's see here, it's like a chart that goes like this. This is your salary, and this is the currency supply. So it like goes like this. And the problem is that divergent, you know, the faster it goes that, you know, the currency loses its value versus how much more you get paid every year. When that is stagnant, you know, in the US, what was the last number I saw? From 2000 till today, I think it was like 500% that they increased the currency supply. But salaries in the United States, the average salary has gone up only 10%. And yeah, so like not all that currency, of course, comes into circulation because like now with like what you see in that central banks buy all these treasuries, they buy like mortgage-backed securities and all these derivatives to try to save the banks. Like not all that directly goes into the economy, but what they do with it. So this is interesting. So they actually, you have this toxic sludge in the bank. So they basically pump it out of the bank into the Federal Reserve sewage tank. And then what happens is that they actually give them fresh currency back for that at face value. They should give them like 0.1 cent per, whatever value of it, because it's garbage. But they give them the full value of the initial value of the investment back, but they don't give it back to them in cash directly. They put it on what is the bank's bank account. So the banks have bank accounts at the Federal Reserve. So they put it in there. So now it's sitting there as what's called reserve currency. And so there's a way around that, and they use that as a reserve. So now they could blend more money from that. So that's why I see real estate prices have gone wild since, they've done this quantitative easing that they called in the United States, because they could borrow more currency and it's near zero. So it's like basically dirt cheap. So everybody's getting in. And then on top of it, they also go into the stock market and like what's called margin debt, which is basically you could borrow against the value of your portfolio. So if your portfolio goes up, like let's say like you have 10,000, it goes up to 15,000. Well, now you have you could borrow let's say 5,000 on that into new money and then reinvest it. So that's called margin debt. And funny enough, I don't know if you remember like the whole sell-off that just happened with Archegos Capital. Did you hear about that in the media?
No.
So basically there were some stocks that lost 50% of value because this one guy at this hedge fund has done another derivative that not even me and Tim has heard of. Like we claim ourselves as pretty good geeks on economics. We hadn't even heard of it. It was called a CFD. So it's some crazy new financial instrument. So I'm gonna I have a video probably coming up soon. We're gonna go a little bit more in detail on, but it's basically they take like the price of the currency today. No, sorry, a stock today, and then if it goes up X amount, they could sell it and then get the difference. But they never had the stocks, so the banks were holding the stocks for these guys. And so they bought the stocks, but through the banks. And so they didn't even have to report that they held X amount. And what happened was that this guy had amassed a fortune pretty much close to like what Bezos and Elon Musk had. And it was $100 billion.
Wow.
That this one guy in his one fund was having. So now there's like banks are struggling right now. It was Credit Suisse and Nomura, which is Credit Suisse is a Swiss bank that have been doing this for him. And then Nomura is a Japanese bank. So they got hit really hard. And now apparently we'll see like what comes out of it. There might be a lot more of this that we don't know about. So that's why I'm going to do some research on it in coming weeks to see what more of this craziness is out there. But these banksters, like they create all these like different derivatives. Like remember in 2008, that was derivatives that blew up the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And now they have like 10 times more derivatives out there. And they also now have what's called corporate derivatives. So all the, the corporate zombies, I call them, because basically it's insane. We talked about them at the start, right? Like how everybody wants to go and lend money now and act like banks. Well, the funny thing is like, as much as almost 20% of corporations in the United States cannot pay the interest on their debt. So they're basically insolvent. So what ends up happening is they're rolling over the debt and then they get into more debt every time. And then they also use their debt to buy back their own stocks to then pump up their share price. And so it's just pure financial manipulation. But that's what happens at the end of when you financialize everything, like you will have everybody financialize everything. And then you hit what I call peak debt, where everybody's just like indebted to their ears and there's no way out of it other than going bust, basically. Either they will go into hyperinflation, I think it's going to, first, it's going to be like deflation where all the debt collapses. So everybody can't pay back their debt. So there's going to be a lot less current, because currency is debt. So when you pay off debt, like there's less of it existing. So when that happens, you can't have that, because then the governments will go bankrupt. So what the governments will do, they will just print infinite amounts of money. And Ben Bernanke said it back in 2002, and he had a speech before he became the head of the central bank. He said, there's no worry about deflation, because deflation will always be beaten by the printing presses. That's what the central bank said. So
it's just
that's
like,
and that's
it's like having unicorns everywhere. Like there's just nothing. It's all imaginary. None of it makes any sense. No logical sense.
Well, it's like unicorns. Like that makes me think about Justin Trudeau. The Prime Minister of Canada. He actually had he was on a children's show and he hugs a unicorn. So that's why everybody's making fun of him for that. But that, like, Canada is like even more insane than the United States. Like here, we just like, you should see like the money supply in Canada. Like the US money supply goes like this. Canadian money supply looks like this. It's gone. Whoa. Like through the roof. Yeah. So I think we're gonna see some terrible things happening here very soon. So I'm not enough prepared for it. I wish I was, but who knows what's gonna happen? Because the thing is, you could have inflation go up like 10% or so, like you're seeing in a lot of countries right now, where there's like even bigger countries like Turkey is struggling right now. Erdogan has fired like 2 central bankers because they don't want to print more money, basically. So you're seeing this struggle like worldwide, and Turkey is one of the biggest economies in the world, right? So they are struggling. Nigeria is struggling. And then, of course, Venezuela right now, they're on their second hyperinflation in 3 years. So basically, it was, I wrote my book, The End of Freedom, that there I predicted the hyperinflation in 2018, like when I wrote it in 2014. So I said, like, when you read this book, it would either be hyperinflate or something, their currency. And of course, that happened. And then now they're on the second one, which is even double the size of the other one. So basically, they're stupid because they believe that their people would accept a new currency that was exactly the same. They just changed the name of it from what was it? Venezuelan Bolivar Fuerte was the first one, and then they changed it out to Soberano. But the Soberanos utterly collapsed again because people don't accept it. The thing is, like, so this is an interesting, like, just story of what we probably could potentially see in the United States and Canada. In Venezuela, there was a lady that was a government employee. She was well paid. But, over, I think it was like, it started really in 2017, like mid 2017, I think it started. But, the salaries didn't catch up to, the cost of living, right? So, and she actually ended up at one point just having to quit her job, like a really high successful job in the government, to then go and sell coffee on the street, and she was fine.
Wow.
Yeah, she was fine selling coffee on the street than being a government employee, which probably would be good, but anyways,
feels that's a little bit better anyway.
But that just shows you, so real things have value and not this paper currency. So the more they print of this currency, the more real things we have around us and that we could hold, the better off we are. Like I interviewed and talked to people that have survived hyperinflation. So I work with a lot of people from former Yugoslav republics.
Well, that's actually what I want to get your, opinion, not financial advice on exactly those types of things. But I do want to split this into two so that I have this, excuse me, the second hour behind my, for my supporters over at rogue.locals.com so that they can check it out there, and for supporters on Rokfin as well. So if you want to shout out to the people on YouTube who are on the podcast who are hearing this for free, and just tell them where they can find you and get more information and, get into all of your content, because you have so much that's so valuable, then tell people where to go to get that, and then we'll see everyone else on the other side.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's very simple. You just go to theeconomictruth.org. There you'll find everything. You'll find links to my books. You can buy them on Amazon or buy them from me if you don't like Amazon and want to support them. And you could also go on to the Tim and John Show. Sorry, it's timandjohnshow.com, which me and Tim, we have lots of videos and interviews, and we dig pretty deep down into money and economics. So if you're all into that, you could join us there. And then, of course, you could join us also through that group. You could join us on our Discord, which is a chat group that I think we're like 450 people soon there that just talks money and economics and trading and geopolitics, all kinds of different things that we discuss and people ask each other. And there's a couple of really good experts there as well, along with just me and Tim. So it's a pretty cool group, and there's always lots of activity there. But I'm actually moving that group because of censorship and because stupid Microsoft is buying it. I'm moving it over to a more censorship-resistant platform called Matrix very soon. So, but that's where you can find it. It's very simple, timandjohnshow.com and theeconomictruth.org.
Awesome. Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the Emperor of Economic Truth, John Sniesen. John, thank you so much for being here tonight. And we'll catch everyone else on the other side, either in Rokfin or on rogue.locals.com.
Thank you.